You may have heard that sourdough is the end-all, be-all when it comes to baking bread. But I'm here to tell y'all that's not the whole story. Hey everyone, welcome back to Grains and Grit. My name is Felicia, and on this channel, we talk all things real whole grains from a biblical perspective, plus more. So this video is going to be a bit shorter, basically just answering the question, is sourdough superior or the best way to make bread as opposed to using commercial yeast? Now, as you can see, I'm here on my property, my beautiful property here in Florida, not my usual kitchen that I'm in. This is one of the probably last few days we will have where it's not sweltering hot. Our summers are very brutal and there would be bugs flying all around my face. So I'm enjoying the nice, beautiful, extremely windy day that we have. And it's possibly one of the last ones that we're going to have for a while, and I'm very sad. Okay, so the big to-do about sourdough versus commercial yeast. Back in 2020, of course, many of y'all might be here because of the huge interest in bread baking at home, because most people were stuck at home, especially wanting to make sourdough. But I knew about sourdough beforehand because it was generally always seen as the best way to bake bread. That's just not always the case, and we're here to actually dive into the full story. Now, I have done another video a few months ago about yeast, the different types of yeast and what they do, what their differences are, what I recommend using them in, and I kind of touched on this a little bit in that video, but here we're going to go into a bit more depth. So real quick to refresh your memory, the difference between commercial yeast and sourdough is commercial yeast is generally one strand of yeast. They figured it out in the late 1800s that they could extract this one particular strand of yeast and they would have a much more reliable rising and baking, and all the commercial bakers rejoice because now we had a much more stable form of yeast. So yes, commercial yeast is way easier to use. It's more consistent. How I use it here in Florida is going to be the same as how you use it in, Arizona or Washington, Alaska, Indiana, wherever it is that you may be, it's going to be the same. Contrast to sourdough, which is the traditional way of leavening a bread, done for thousands of years. The Bible talks about leaven in the bread dough, and we know that was traditionally some sort of sourdough because, again, commercial yeast wasn't discovered until the late 1800s. And what that is it's capturing the wild yeast around you. But the one advantage of that sourdough starter also has it has lactic acid bacteria, which commercial yeast does not have because, well, it's just yeast. Compared to the sourdough starter that you have, not only is it yeast, but also lactic acid bacteria, which is really great for your gut. The bad news about sourdough starters and why commercial yeast it was rejoiced and so popular is because sourdough is a bit finicky. It can be unpredictable. It can be unreliable. It's also not consistent. So what I do here in Florida is going to be different than how you do it in, say, Arizona, where it's dry. Maybe you're a higher altitude. It is not as humid. So that's the difficulty of learning sourdough, especially through YouTube videos, is because what I do, you just have to get a feel for it, and you have to just get the experience, because again, what I do here in Florida with a hotter climate is going to be different than, say, what you're doing in the winter time in Canada, where there's not as much humidity and far colder than what I have here. Another thing about sourdough starters, of course, is that the yeast, the variety does change based on, the yeast here in Florida and my house and, this particular part of Florida I'm in, on my hands. All of those things are so vastly different than where you may live. So again, that's the beauty of sourdough, is the diversity and the variety. And absolutely, I do agree that is the way that God basically created it to be. Not that he created sourdough starter on day 4 or whatever of creation, but he did create the environments where if we were to have a leaven, it would be a natural sourdough. So I do understand and fully agree that sourdough is definitely the traditional method for baking yeast breads. But here's where it's not always the best. And that is based on the flour that you are using. See, contrast to thousands of years where they were using sourdough starters, they were also milling their grains and having true whole grains from freshly milled wheat. And that is no longer the case these days. So a lot of people, what I see is they're talking about how wonderful and beneficial sourdough is, but they're using fake dead flour from the store. So they're not even getting the full benefits that you can get. Because remember, fake flour is nothing but gluten and starch. So the only thing that you're fermenting is gluten and starch. Now again, I will give you credit that the sourdough starter itself does have that lactic acid bacteria. It does soak, it does cause that flour to be soaked longer. So it is possible that it breaks down the strands, which is why some people can handle it digestively speaking, even with fake flour than they can with regular store-bought bread made with commercial yeast. So there is that, but you are missing out on so many beneficial nutrients. So I do actually stand by the fact that commercial yeast with freshly milled wheat is far superior than a sourdough starter made with fake flour. There, I said it. May the internet hate me forever. But it's true, because remember, with freshly milled flour, you have all of the nutrients, all of the B vitamins, that vitamin E, all of these wonderful nutrients that God put in the seed. And so you're consuming real whole grains. And then on top of that, you're creating a fermented food, which is making it even better for your gut health. Now again, to be devil's advocate, yeah, I get it that fake flour from the store has been enriched, so it might be releasing those nutrients as well. But let us remember, it is only about 4 or 5 nutrients that they've added back to the bread, just a few of the B vitamins and iron, contrast to like 27 or so that they took out of the bread to begin with by making white flour. So trust me, whole grain, freshly milled is always the way to go compared to flour from the store.
Oh, hey, don't mind me. We're going to interrupt this little broadcast. And I get asked many times where I purchase my grains in bulk from. And I have many sources, but my main favorite source is definitely Pleasant Hill Grain. They are by far the cleanest wheat berries I have ever received. This is actually one of the buckets that it comes in. Pleasant Hill Grain isn't just for grains, but it's also everything pertaining to grain. It truly is a one-stop shop. And the great thing about Pleasant Hill Grain as well is that you're supporting small-time family business. Plus, their customer service is amazing. So if you're wanting quality, I definitely and highly recommend shopping with Pleasant Hill Grain. Just go to grainsandgrit.com/PHG. Now back to filling up my grains.
Well, as I said in my yeast video, the rankings of dough from worst to the best when it comes to bread, the rankings of the bread. Of course, the worst is your traditional regular store-bought bread. Don't even bother. I'm not even like it. I shouldn't even be mentioning it because it shouldn't even be an option for you. But some people it is. And that's definitely the worst. Regular run-of-the-mill store-bought bread. If you have any issues with gluten, you're going to have issues with that. Don't even bother. The next best thing is to be at least baking your bread at home with fake flour using commercial yeast. That's better because at least there's not all the ridiculously added ingredients that are added, like preservatives and things like that are added to store-bought bread. But still, not quite there. Better than the ridiculously bad stuff, but still not there. Now, if you are going to do it from home with fake flour, I definitely would recommend a sourdough because you're getting a bit more of that gut health bacteria that is far better for you, even with the fake flour. So yeah, that definitely is better. But then after that, what even better than that is freshly milled wheat using commercial yeast. And then of course, after that is the ultimate best way to do it is sourdough starter with freshly milled wheat. And I'm not sure by the time this video comes out that I will have a sourdough bread for you. I'm hoping to have it. If I have it by, whenever I have a sourdough video out, I will try to link it in the description box below, for you guys to have sourdough with freshly milled wheat. Because guys, I'm all about doing things the way that God created it, as close to the way God created it as we can. And you know what? Sourdough for me, it has been such a challenge with freshly milled wheat. And if I was to be waiting to get sourdough perfect to feed my family freshly milled wheat, we probably still would not be consuming freshly milled wheat. We would probably still be buying bread from the store or going without bread completely because there's just such a learning curve to it. It's also, it is more difficult for me, especially as a large family, to make enough quantity. It takes so much more time. So if sourdough with freshly milled grains is the reason it's daunting, and it might be why you're not milling your grains to bake bread, just don't stress about it. Just start milling your grains and using commercial yeast because you will still receive so many benefits. It is still life-changing benefits to be consuming freshly milled grains with commercial yeast than to just not do it at all, just because you can't get sourdough right. So again, ideally, sourdough with freshly milled grains is certainly the most traditional method of creating bread, but we have the commercial yeast to make it easier on us. It is definitely faster. It's still delicious bread. You're still getting all the nutrients from your freshly milled wheat, so do not feel guilty about that at all. Just keep milling your wheat and bake that bread. Use it in your baked goods and all of those things. So as always, hopefully this was helpful for y'all and that you enjoyed a little glimpse of my property here in Florida. And as always, y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.